So there's a fire. Man is mad. From Police Chief.
In the quiet heartland of America, a story of profound betrayal unfolded, extinguishing two vibrant lives just as a new one was about to begin. Today, on True Crime Continent, we delve into the heartbreaking case of Melissa Lamesch, a dedicated EMT and an expectant mother, whose future was stolen by the very person who should have protected her. This is a chilling narrative of a casual acquaintance, a life-altering pregnancy, and a horrifying act of violence driven by a selfish desire to evade responsibility. We begin by introducing you to Melissa Lamesch, a woman whose spirit radiated warmth, strength, and unwavering compassion. Born on Mother's Day, May 10, 1993, Melissa was one of 5 close-knit siblings, raised by her parents, Dina and Gus, in the serene community of Mount Morris, Illinois. Her siblings, Carl, Cassie, Brian, and Julia Lynn, universally describe her as a caring, unselfish, and fierce individual. She was, in their words, the perfect mix of sugar and spice, someone who would truly go above and beyond for anyone in need. Her mother, Deanna, often noted the striking similarities between them, particularly Melissa's strong sense of independence and her undeniable stubborn streak. Melissa was also known for her sharp wit, her incredible brightness, and a touch of perfectionism in everything she pursued. Her brother, Carl, recalled that Melissa tackled every endeavor with meticulous precision, achieving excellence in whatever she set her mind to. This dedication was perhaps most evident in her chosen career path, becoming an emergency medical technician, EMT. It was a profession that demanded immense strength, passion, and an unyielding commitment, qualities Melissa possessed in abundance. More than that, it required the profound compassion and empathy to help others, a genuine desire that beat at the core of Melissa's being. What leads someone to dedicate their life to saving others? For Melissa, inspiration struck during an unexpected incident in college that landed her in the ER. Her positive experience with the EMTs who assisted her ignited a spark, drawing her towards that path. She had also been hosting popular trivia nights at a local bar, a frequent haunt for first responders. These interactions further solidified her resolve to return to school and become an EMT herself. Her family recalls this decision as a defining moment in her life, a journey they watched with immense pride. Melissa secured a job with Trace Ambulance in Tinley Park. Fresh out of her program in January 2020, her mother recounted that Melissa was part of the ambulance crew that transported Chicago's very first COVID-19 patient. It was an unprecedented, chaotic time to enter the medical field, a period of immense uncertainty and pressure. It was also around this turbulent time that Melissa received life-altering news. She was pregnant. At 27 years old, the pregnancy was unplanned, yet Melissa embraced it with overwhelming joy. She was excited about becoming a mother, and critically, she had the unwavering, loving support of her entire family. This familial blessing was particularly significant because the baby's father, Matthew Plote, felt precisely the opposite. He was disturbingly vocal in his insistence that Melissa terminate the pregnancy, a demand she staunchly refused. Melissa knew that becoming a mother was her calling, and she wouldn't let his absence or disapproval deter her. Her family wholeheartedly agreed. They believed Melissa was better off without him, a strong, capable, and intelligent woman who needed no one to fulfill her dreams of motherhood. Ironically, despite the central role Plote would play, Melissa had been remarkably private about his identity. Her family, despite their persistent efforts, initially struggled to piece together who the baby's father was. Her sister, Cassie, eventually put the pieces together through subtle hints and Melissa's social media. Others would only learn his identity after the tragedy. Matthew Plote was no stranger to Melissa. They had met back in 2013 at one of those very trivia nights Melissa hosted at the first responder bar. Plote, a paramedic and volunteer firefighter with the Carroll Stream Fire District, was a regular. They had developed a casual, non-exclusive relationship, essentially friends with benefits. So, when Melissa became pregnant, it was a surprise to both. But for Melissa, it was a welcome surprise, one she embraced with open arms, a stark contrast to Plote's reaction. Her mother, Deanna, firmly believed Melissa was born to become a mother, a sentiment echoed by Melissa's meticulous preparations for her baby boy's arrival. Knowing she would need her family's support, Melissa made a pivotal decision in October 2020. She moved back into her childhood home with her father, Gus. Her parents, though divorced, were equally thrilled and eager to support her in any way she needed. It's a small comfort to know Melissa had such a devoted support system surrounding her in those final weeks. Beyond emotional support, Melissa had also been experiencing some health issues late in her pregnancy, including high blood pressure and fainting spells. Living with her father also ensured she and the baby would be safe and cared for. But how could anyone anticipate the terrifying danger that lurked just around the corner? No one could have imagined that Melissa and baby Barrett were far from safe.
On November 25th, 2020, it was the day before Thanksgiving, I received a phone call shortly after 4 o'clock from the endorse police chief. And he asked me, frantically, is anybody in my house? And I said, my daughter Melissa is. And so there's a fire. And it's bad.
Just 2 days before she was scheduled to be induced, and chillingly, 1 day before Thanksgiving, both of their lives were brutally stolen. It was November 25th, 2020. Due to COVID precautions and her imminent delivery, Melissa had planned a quiet Thanksgiving. She was preparing for her hospital visit the day after Thanksgiving, looking forward to a simple holiday dinner at home with just her dad. She never made it. At 4:28 p.m., a desperate 911 call came in from Gus's neighbor. Smoke was pouring out of his house. This was no small fire. When firefighters arrived, they were met with a locked front door and a house so thick with smoke that visibility was reduced to mere inches. Crawling on their hands and knees, they bravely pushed through. They entered believing someone was inside, not just because a car was in the driveway, but because the fire chief, who personally knew Gus, had made a panicked call to him. When Gus confirmed Melissa was there, the horrifying reality set in. Imagine the terror Gus felt, rushing home, knowing his pregnant daughter was trapped inside. But by the time he arrived, it was too late. Firefighters eventually located Melissa's body, lying face down on the kitchen floor. They dragged her out, desperately hoping to save her and the baby. But tragically, both Melissa and her son were already gone. At the same time, Melissa's mother, Deanna, received a similarly terrifying call from her son, Carl, asking if she'd heard from Melissa. Though she hadn't, she dismissed it for a second. Then Carl explained, their dad's house was on fire, and no one could reach Melissa. In that agonizing moment, everything came crashing down for Deanna. She was with Melissa's younger sister, Julia Lynn, whose 17th birthday it was that day. They were actually getting cake when the call came. They dropped everything and rushed to Mount Morris. Halfway there, a call from her other son, Brian, came in. Before even answering, Deanna and Julia Lynn had a gut-sinking feeling Melissa was gone. And they were right. Cassie, Melissa's older sister, felt the same profound collapse of her world in a parking lot when Carl called. She too rushed to the scene, but Melissa and her baby were already lost. With such a devastating scene, what was the immediate priority for investigators? The first order of business was to determine the cause of the fire and, more importantly, whether the fire was the cause of Melissa's death. Initially, before forensic investigators could examine the scene, it was assumed Melissa had likely died from smoke inhalation. Perhaps she'd been cooking, experienced one of her fainting spells, and couldn't escape the smoke. At the time, it sounded plausible enough. But as soon as investigators and the fire chief could safely enter the charred remains of the home, they quickly realized the initial assumption couldn't be true. It was immediately obvious that the fire originated in the kitchen, with most of the damage concentrated there, specifically in the cabinet area above the stove. While this could suggest a cooking accident, a closer look revealed unsettling inconsistencies. All the stove burners were switched off. The oven was empty. No signs of cooking whatsoever. An examination of the circuit breaker ruled out an electrical fault. With accidental causes eliminated, only one chilling conclusion remained. The fire was set intentionally. What was even stranger was that the fire, despite its severity, was described as survivable. Meaning, if someone were inside, they should have been able to escape. Melissa was an EMT. She knew fire safety protocols. There were multiple escape routes. There was no doubt she would have walked out of that house if she could. This strongly suggested she was incapacitated before the fire was set. Lead investigator Brian Ketter, upon examining Melissa in the ambulance, noted her injuries were inconsistent with dying in a fire. From that moment forward, a horrifying truth began to solidify. This was likely a homicide. Their next crucial step was to interview Melissa's loved ones, to learn more about her life and uncover anyone who might have wanted her dead. Naturally, the baby's father, Matthew Plote, immediately came up. Through conversations with the family, a disturbing picture emerged. Matt was unequivocally not supportive of Melissa keeping the baby. He had made zero effort to be involved. After pressuring her to terminate the pregnancy and she refused, he had, according to her family, completely ghosted her. While Melissa would still send him occasional updates about the pregnancy, hoping her son would one day have the option of a relationship with his father, Matt rarely responded. Melissa didn't want him as a boyfriend. She simply wanted the door open for her child. But he showed no interest at all. This lack of engagement, coupled with his earlier demands, screamed red flag to investigators. But the biggest red flag, the one that would haunt investigators for months, came from Melissa's sister, Cassie. She revealed that earlier that fateful day, she and Melissa had been on a 2.5-hour phone call that was abruptly cut short. Melissa had suddenly exclaimed, "You've got to be kidding me. Matt is here. I'll make this quick and I'll let you know what he wants." Cassie's clear understanding was that Matt had shown up unannounced. Melissa would see what he wanted, and then call her right back. That call, of course, never came. This meant Matthew Plote was likely the last person to see Melissa alive. Investigators immediately brought him in for questioning that same night. They couldn't yet call him a person of interest, but the goal was to gauge his story, his demeanor, and see if they could learn anything new. Right from the start, Matt's energy was profoundly strange. When investigators delivered the devastating news that Melissa was dead, and by extension, his baby was also dead, Plote simply sat in silence for a few seconds. Then chillingly, he responded with a flat, "Okay." How does a human react to the death of their unborn child and the child's mother? Typically with shock, grief, or at least some form of emotion. But for Matt, there was nothing. No tears, no visible shock, no "I need a moment." He didn't even ask a single question. He just proceeded with the interview as if everything were perfectly normal, as if they'd just told him a local store was closing. Alarm bells were blaring for the investigators. His lack of reaction was not only humanly shocking, but also strategically unintelligent. Even murderers often try to feign emotion. Matt didn't even bother. He cooperated in answering questions, but his words were as cold as his demeanor. The man literally used the term deadline to describe the pregnancy. "There's a deadline for that," he stated, referring to a timeline of discussing the pregnancy. The kind of person who uses deadline instead of due date for a pregnancy is often someone who sees the impending birth as a problem to be dealt with, rather than a life to be welcomed. This chilling word choice, among others, suggested his deadline wasn't for Melissa to give birth, but for himself to ensure she wouldn't. During the interview, he tried to craft a narrative of innocence, claiming he had come around to the idea of being involved in the baby's life. He stated he dropped by Melissa's house to discuss finances and, disturbingly, claimed they had consensual sex in the kitchen. This claim, however, immediately raised red flags for investigators. Melissa's family had told them that in her final weeks, her pregnancy was incredibly difficult. She was barely eating and spent most of her time asleep. The idea of her being intimate with Matt seemed highly unlikely. Despite their overwhelming suspicions, investigators had no immediate reason to hold him. Matt was allowed to leave. Their next critical step depended on the autopsy results. They desperately needed to know, did Melissa have soot in her airways? What were her carbon monoxide levels? These forensic indicators would reveal if she was alive when the fire started. If she was, it might rule out homicide. If she wasn't, it would confirm someone had killed her before the blaze. The initial autopsy took place on November 27th, but full results would take 10 to 14 business days. Knowing every minute counted in a murder investigation, they rushed a vial of Melissa's blood to a local hospital for a quick carbon monoxide screen. Within 5 minutes, they had their answer. Her levels were completely normal. This strongly suggested she had died before the fire. The The second autopsy, performed on December 8th, provided even more horrific confirmation. Melissa Lamesch's true cause of death was strangulation. A medical examiner found evidence of severe petechial hemorrhaging in her neck and cheeks, as well as signs of blunt force trauma. Chillingly, it was also determined she had likely been sexually assaulted. While Matt had claimed consensual sex, her other injuries and the circumstances of her death vehemently contradicted this. A sexual assault kit was performed, and crucial swabs were collected from under her fingernails, a telltale sign that Melissa had fought back against her attacker. By this point, Matt was their undeniable number one suspect. But rushing an arrest without definitive DNA evidence was risky, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic slowing lab results significantly. Melissa's family grew understandably impatient, agonizing over the fact that Matt was out there, living his life, while their beloved daughter and unborn grandson were gone. The irony was infuriating. A man trained to save lives was now suspected of taking two, one of them his own child. The sheer depravity of such an act against a pregnant woman, let alone the mother of his child, is truly beyond words. Melissa had been so excited for her future, meticulously planning for her son's arrival. She had even kept his name a secret, a common practice, perhaps to avoid others' doubts. Her family knew only his nickname, Little Bear. It wasn't until after her death, when they tragically went through her belongings, that her sister Cassie found a note confirming his name, Barrett. In that devastating moment, they finally learned the name of the grandson they would never meet, a small, heartbreaking piece of connection in the face of immense loss. Imagine the agonizing experience of going through Melissa's childhood home, now a tragic crime scene, filled with soot-covered belongings. Baby toys she'd already picked out, blankets she dreamed of wrapping Barrett in, all the items meant for a future that would never be. The weight of their double loss became even more painfully real. The funeral, a small family service due to COVID, took place on December 14th. In a profoundly heartbreaking decision, they opted for an open casket. Deanna, Melissa's mother, described longing to hold her grandson's hand, knowing his own mother never had the chance. She gasped the first time she touched him, then never wanted to let him go. Deanna was the last to leave the cemetery that day, enduring an unimaginable grief. The strength it took for them to carry on was immense, but their fight for justice would not waver. They called investigators at least once a week, a stark contrast to Matt, who never once inquired about the investigation, a telling detail for a man claiming innocence. Matt, the selfish individual he was, simply focused on moving on with his own life. Investigators obtained search warrants for both his and Melissa's phone records. While their communication proved limited, what truly stood out was Matt's communication with other women. It turned out that Matthew Plote, despite his unremarkable appearance, was quite the player. In addition to Melissa, he was involved with a number of other women, including a girlfriend with whom he appeared to be living. This revelation painted a clear motive for investigators. What if Matt killed Melissa because having a baby would disrupt his carefully constructed bachelor lifestyle? The logic was twisted, illogical even, given that Melissa wasn't demanding anything from him. No marriage, no joint living, just an open door for his child. Yet, in his mind, killing her was a solution, a way to maintain his preferred existence. The sheer idiocy of such a choice, especially when a simple conversation or legal agreement could have sufficed, is mind-boggling. Investigators began to close in, even if the pace of forensic labs was agonizingly slow. 6 months after the DNA and sexual assault kit were sent for testing, the results finally arrived. No surprise here. The male DNA found under Melissa's fingernails was a match to Matthew Plote, confirming that she fought for her life and for her babies as he strangled her. The DNA from the sexual assault kit also matched him, confirming the non-consensual nature of the encounter. On March 8, 2022, a warrant was issued for his arrest. The very next day, on March 9th, Matthew Plote was finally apprehended. He was facing a formidable 10 counts, including 4 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of intentional homicide of an unborn child, 1 count of residential arson, 1 count of aggravated domestic battery, and 1 count of concealment of a homicidal death. He was held on a $10 million bail, which he unsuccessfully tried to get reduced the following month. The judge, recognizing the extreme threat he posed to society, refused to risk letting him out, even temporarily. Melissa's family and the entire community breathed a sigh of relief. And in a strange twist of fate, Matt was arrested on Melissa's father's birthday, a small, symbolic victory amidst profound grief. An arrest, however, is merely the beginning of a long and arduous judicial process. By November 2023, over 19 months after his arrest and 3 years after the murder, Matthew Plote still hadn't gone to trial. His defense attorneys attempted to have the charges thrown out altogether, arguing that too much time had passed between the alleged crime and Plote's arrest. Fortunately, this motion was swiftly denied, a just decision that paved the way for the trial date finally set for March 2024. To Melissa's loved ones, and to anyone familiar with the case, Plote's guilt seemed undeniably obvious. Yet, his defense attorneys mounted a vigorous, if at times perplexing, effort to paint a different picture. They argued that Matt was an upstanding citizen, a dedicated volunteer firefighter and paramedic, questioning why such a man would suddenly commit such a heinous act against a pregnant woman. They even made the rather bizarre argument that as an experienced firefighter, Plote would have set a better fire, one that would have completely incinerated the house and all evidence, leaving no room for doubt. This inadvertently suggested he was incompetent at his own job, an odd strategic choice. They also claimed the prosecution falsely painted him as a monster, singling him out without properly investigating other potential suspects. But who else had any motive? No one. Matt was the sole individual who stood to benefit from Melissa's death and the death of his own son. The prosecution hammered this point home. Plote killed Melissa to preserve his selfish, bachelor lifestyle, a life he believed would be irrevocably hindered by fatherhood. They argued that his deliberate secrecy about Melissa and the pregnancy, keeping it from everyone in his life, was a calculated strategy. If no one knew the baby was coming, no one would ask when the baby didn't arrive. Over the course of 3 days, the prosecution called several witnesses to the stand, each testimony building an ironclad case. The main fire investigator, Michael, testified that there was absolutely no evidence of an electrical fire or a cooking accident. He confirmed the fire was intentionally set, contradicting the defense's attempts to cast doubt on his report's language like most likely, and it is believed. The defense's own fire inspector, who admitted he never even visited the scene and only reviewed photos, tried to contradict Michael, but his testimony held little weight. Both forensic pathologists who conducted Melissa's autopsies testified, confirming that Melissa was killed before the fire was ever set. There was no soot in her airways, her carbon monoxide levels were normal, and the injuries to her body definitively pointed to strangulation as the cause of death. One pathologist testified that Melissa's body showed the most petechial hemorrhages she had ever seen in a strangulation case, a horrifying detail that spoke volumes about the sheer force and brutality Plote inflicted upon her. Imagine the terror Melissa must have endured in those moments, fighting desperately to save herself and her unborn child. The depravity required to commit such an act, especially against a pregnant woman carrying your own child, is truly beyond comprehension. A neighbor also took the stand, testifying that on the day Melissa was killed, he saw a man, wearing a hat, enter her house. He initially thought it was a salesperson, but then watched Melissa let him inside, which struck him as strange, especially since Melissa was under strict doctor's orders to limit contact due to COVID-19 before her delivery. He even discussed this odd occurrence with Gus shortly after the murder. But perhaps the most crucial testimony came from Melissa's sister, Cassie. She recounted that chilling phone call on the day Melissa died, where Melissa abruptly ended their 2.5-hour conversation, saying, "You've got to be kidding me. Matt is here. I'll make this quick and I'll let you know what he wants." Cassie testified that Melissa never called her back. This testimony was profoundly important. It confirmed Matthew Plote was the last known person to be with Melissa, and that she was alive moments before her death, implying the person who interrupted their call was her killer. The defense had fiercely tried to get Cassie's testimony thrown out as hearsay during a preliminary hearing, but the judge rightly allowed it. The judge also allowed 4 hours of Plote's 7-hour interrogation video to be played for the jury. The defense vehemently opposed this, arguing that the prosecution was trying to imply guilt through Plote's silence, when he simply had the right to remain silent. They claimed his silence meant nothing, and that he had always been forthcoming about wanting to help with the baby. But the jury, composed of smart, discerning individuals, saw through the facade. After 5 days of harrowing testimony and a mere 2 hours of deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Matthew Plote was found guilty on all 10 counts. As the verdict was read, Plote remained utterly emotionless. Melissa's mother, Deanna, eloquently stated, "There is no coming back from the loss of our daughter and grandchild." When that verdict was read, Melissa's family was overwhelmed by a wave of shock and profound relief. For years, they had lived with uncertainty, fearing he might never even be arrested. To finally get the guilty verdict they had hoped for, the justice they so desperately sought, was an indescribable feeling. Initially, they thought the legal battle was over. But in April 2024, Plote and his attorneys petitioned for a new trial, arguing against the admission of certain evidence. Mercifully, this motion was dismissed, sparing the family further agony. The legal ordeal was finally, truly over. On June 27, 2024, Matthew Plote was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 75 years. The courts came down hard on him, a just and fitting consequence for his monstrous actions. Melissa's loved ones were given the opportunity to read powerful victim impact statements, a moment of immense courage as they directly addressed the man who had stolen their future. To sit there, to maintain composure, and speak through the raw pain of loss to your loved one's killer requires incredible strength. And then the ultimate insult. Matthew Plote, this cold, calculating monster, had the audacity to speak, claiming he shares in their pain of losing Melissa and Barrett. A truly sickening and infuriating statement from a man who meticulously planned and executed their deaths. No one in that courtroom, certainly not the family, believed his hollow words. There are simply no words left for Matthew Plote. He is a truly vile waste of life. As of now, Plote has tried to appeal his conviction, but his efforts have been unsuccessful, and Melissa's family hopes it stays that way forever. Despite the immense, irreplaceable loss, Melissa's family has chosen to honor her and baby Barrett's memory in truly beautiful ways. They've collected children's toys and made donations to local homeless shelters in Barrett's name, ensuring his brief existence brings joy to others. In a particularly poignant gesture, they've made donations to the Animal House shelter, the no-kill shelter where Melissa adopted her beloved cat, Antonio. Melissa cherished Antonio. He was like her baby. Tragically, Antonio also perished in the fire. To give back to the place that brought Melissa such joy is a testament to their enduring love. We'll leave a link to the Animal House Shelter website in the show notes in case any of you wish to make a donation in Melissa's and Antonio's memory. They have also sponsored a magnificent magnolia tree at the Morton Arboretum, a botanical garden and research center that was one of Melissa's favorite places. This beautiful tree will be lit up every holiday season in her honor. Nearby, a memorial stone bears a powerful quote from the script, one of Melissa's favorite bands, that perfectly encapsulates her spirit and the family's enduring love. Love is why we do it. Love is worth the pain. Love is why we fall down and get back up again. Love is where the heart lies. Love is from above. Love is this. This is love. The family also previously started a GoFundMe to help with these efforts. And while nothing can ever replace Melissa or give Barrett a chance at life, ongoing support for these initiatives would undoubtedly be put to good use. Melissa was a kind, fierce, strong, and independent person who deserved so much more than the horrific end she met. At the very least, the monster who stole her life and her sons will spend the rest of his miserable existence behind bars, exactly where he belongs. This case, a chilling reminder of how profound selfishness can turn fatally violent, leaves us with lingering questions about human nature. But it also stands as a testament to the enduring love of a family and the radiant spirit of a woman who was destined for motherhood. That's going to be it for True Crime Continent today. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this heartbreaking case. Please share your comments below. If you're seeking more in-depth true crime stories and compelling investigations, be sure to subscribe right here to True Crime Continent for new episodes every week. Until then, stay safe out there,